All right, welcome to the v1.48 Sprint 70 Sprint demo and community meeting for Kiali. We are going to move along without our usual host, which is Lucas. Couldn't make it today, so I'll take over and let's get started. So we have an open agenda. We're going to start off with just a summary of what we did in the sprint, the highlights for Kiali v1.48, which is pretty robust, and we've got a variety of demos for you today. And then we'll stop the recording, and if there's any community discussion, you can ask any questions. Everything is wide open. We've got some developers here, so if you want to ask anything, now is the time. All right. So in Sprint 70, you can see here, which is our GitHub project board. If you go to Kiali on GitHub and go to the projects area, you can always track what's happening for our work for that particular sprint, or you see what's done, what's in progress, or what's potentially in the backlog. You'll notice that we've spent a lot of time actually on epics, which are actually culminating in this sprint, that have been going a little bit for the last few sprints. So we're going to talk about what we've done in those areas, but we've done a lot of stuff specifically trying to address some scale as Kiali and service mesh gets used more and more in production. The level of mesh deployments is getting more and more complex. Topologies are getting bigger. Namespace numbers and sizes are getting bigger, so we are working actively to increase our ability and capabilities in those areas. All right, let's get right into the highlights. And the first thing is something that Leandro's been working on, and I'm going to hand it off to Leandro to talk about it.
Okay, sure. I will share the screen. Okay, so the side panel for the Istio configurations for this section is now redesigned with a new look and new features. So previously, the side panel was only present on some resources like virtual services and destination rules. But now we are giving the side panel to every Istio object. For example, a gateway will have its own side panel with some common new features and information, right? For example, we can see that we have a new header with the nature of the resource, the name, and also some information, and an important thing, the health. So we can see that this object is okay, it's analyzed, and there is no issues found, right? Also, we can see the labels. If the resource has labels, we can see it. Also, the next part is an important part is references. So we can see that this virtual service, has some references to other objects like services, workloads, or Istio configurations, right? This is a service, but also here is indicating that we have references to gateways and destination rules. Apart from from these references, if the object has some kind of warning or of error, instead of seeing that references, we will see the validation references that are very useful to troubleshoot. So, for example, in this sidecar, I had an error. The reference is not there, but we have the validation references indicating that this sidecar has conflicts with this other sidecar, and we can go there. When we fix this, the references will be back. Finally, there is a new section called Help that aims to help the user when navigating or editing the configuration. right? If we look into the editor, we can see that some lines has this information icon. So this is hint us that this line has help information. And when we edit, it will show us a little description of the field, right? So for host is a little help, also for example for root. So this is something new. This is a first step to help the user in navigating these resources, and we hope that in the future this will expand with more information or analysis. So this is all that I had for the side panel. In the background, there is a huge work from my colleagues getting in the backend these references and getting in a performant way. So there is a lot of work in the backgrounds also done by the team. So thank you, and I'm back to Jay.
All right. Let me come back to the slides. Thanks, Leandro. I personally think this is an awesome feature. So really good work there. All right, this is something that's been asked for by the community for quite some time. And I'm gonna let Maz talk about our new label filtering feature.
All right, so the idea here is on the graph where we have the find hide feature, we've added the ability to add custom label expressions, find hide. So it's label colon, the name of the label, and optionally the value. So you can actually highlight nodes on the graph that are labeled with that specific label, and you can also hide the nodes. So for example, you could say, show me the nodes only in the West data center. So I'm going to show you a real quick demo that I recorded that I'll just talk through. Feeling your So you can see this, correct?
Yep.
So up in the find, you see we can type in the expression label data center. So I'm going to look for all the nodes that have the data center label, and that's what I'm highlighting here. On both of those namespaces, you could see those nodes that were highlighted have that label, but these generator nodes do not have that label. So there's no data center label at all on those nodes. So I'm only showing highlighting the nodes that have the data center label on them. Now, conversely, you can actually, because the label data center is a unary operator, you could say not, show me all the ones that don't have that label, and there you could see the generator nodes were highlighted and the other ones were deselected or dehighlighted. But now you can also say, I want to see only those that have the data center with the east value, and you can see the top nodes have that, the bottom do not. Conversely, I could say those that don't have the data center with an east value will be highlighted. Here you can see we're going to see the west. So the west nodes are now highlighted and the east nodes are now unhighlighted. And just how you can do this in the find, you can do this in the hide text box. So this is going to literally hide or remove the nodes from the graph that have data center labels of east. So those top app nodes should go away, and there you see only the traffic generator is left because he doesn't have the data center label. Back to you, Jay. That's all I had for that demo.
All right, excellent. Again, another really good feature that people have been asking for so that they can use their custom labeling and then apply it straight to the graph view to limit or highlight their topology. All right, moving right along. So I've got two slides here. One of the major things that we've been working on, especially was Lucas's. Unfortunately, he's not here to show it today, but we have done a lot of work on layouts because layouts are really critical to looking at your topology, and we were unsatisfied with some of the layouts that we had, and we're trying to improve it for large topologies. In that same vein, Nick is going to talk about a topology generator that we have to help people experiment with or play with larger topologies. So he's going to show you that, and then he'll introduce you to some of the new layouts that we have. Go ahead, Nick.
Yep. So the generator proxy tool, like Jay said, is a tool that helps you visualize large workloads, large deployments, without actually having to deploy those, specifically for testing things like large topologies. You don't always have a cluster available where you can deploy a large amount of workloads and services and whatnot. And so it basically works by intercepting Kiali Graph API calls, creating some namespaces for you, doing all the setup you need in order to generate the graph, and then mocking out that graph response so that you can play around with these different layouts as you see here. Let me share my screen. You all see that?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So the generator is in GitHub. It's in the Kiali repo. You can go to GitHub and you can play around with it. It's a command line tool, so you just run this command line, and it will do the things like creating namespaces for you and set up the proxy. So here's a live demo of kind of what that looks like. What I actually have deployed in my Minikube cluster is just book info. As you can see, I'm running the generator. I'm running Kiali standalone and the UI, and it's pointing to the proxy, the generator proxy, and I can now have this graph view where there's a bunch of different workloads and services. There's probably about 50 in here. And this just lets you play around with larger topologies and things. And this gets into the layout work that Jay mentioned earlier that I'll be talking about. So you can see with this layout, this is the Dagger layout. That's the default. Here I'll switch over to what this looks like on book info. You can see for a smaller deployment, such as book info, Dagger looks pretty good. But whenever you get to a larger one like this, it doesn't look as nice. So one of the things that we put a bunch of work into this release is, as Jay said, getting different layouts that would work for different kinds of deployments, specifically larger deployments. So click to a new layout. You can see this is much nicer. You can see more what's going on. We've got 3 ingress nodes that are communicating with the different app nodes. Things are a lot easier to see on this layout. Concentric is another layout that was added. This will arrange your nodes in more of a wheel pattern. So in this case, we've got 3 ingress nodes that are talking to the rest of the service mesh. So it puts those nodes in the center. So you get kind of this hub and spoke pattern that you see here. That in a minute. Breadth first was another layout that was added. So this is a similar to the grid layout, except it arranges things slightly differently. And depending on the way that your mesh is laid out, you might prefer one or the other. So having more layout options just gives users the ability to have a graph that works for them, hopefully at whatever scale they're running. So in addition to the different graph layouts, there's also these namespace layouts that have been added. And what this will do, hop over to this other view, this will actually change the arrangement of your workloads within the namespace box itself. as you can see here, I've got the default view, which was Kiali Dagger. Well, I'm going to change this over to breadth first. You can see it changes the way that the workloads are laid out within the namespace box itself. And this, again, will just give you a different view that will look better than on some workloads and others. It gives you more flexibility when it comes to finding the graph that works for you. And if we go back to the larger topology, you can see that actually affects the way that the graph is laid out itself. So now you've kind of got this this dashboard pattern here. And another thing that I'll highlight that was added was the ability to hide edges. So you've got this nice dashboard layout now. You can zoom in and get some of the labels. If I had unhealthy nodes, those would be highlighted by coloring on the boxes. Which node was unhealthy, zoom into those, and get more detail from there. There's also the ability to hide all the unhealthy edges. So hiding all the healthy edges will highlight just the unhealthy edges. So you can see here, you can imagine if this were one of the larger layouts, it would be very easy to spot which nodes might having traffic issues, requests are slowing down or you're getting error responses. This is another tool that was added to help you identify areas of the graph that be of interest. So I think that's all I wanted to cover. Jay, was there anything else that?
No, that's excellent. Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit more about the graph on the next slide as well. Let me back to sharing it. So that was the topology generator, and then also a quick look at some of the new topology layout options that we have. So, I mean, I think one of the things that's always been true is that there doesn't seem to be the silver bullet for doing layouts for your topologies. Everybody's got something a little bit different. And so what we really tried to do with Kiali is find the options that different people can combine to get the look that they want. And you may want to be able to look at your entire request flow, a large topology all at once. You might want to filter it down as what Maz was showing, or we have a bunch of ways of highlighting and hiding information. Nick just showed the different layouts. You'll notice, by the way, in the layouts that we removed two of the older layouts, Cola and Coast Bilkent, because they really didn't seem to play very well with traffic topology graphs. They were more for scientific type topologies, and that's why we moved to the introducing concentric, which gives you again that nice view when you've got some very dense nodes in the middle with a variety of more leafy services, and then the grid and breadth first. And then we know that Dagger works really well with especially smaller, very directed traffic like book info and some of the other smaller namespace layouts that people have. But overall, what you're really trying to be able to do here with Kiali is to find a combination of layout and potentially inner namespace layout and hide and highlighting features that are going to get you a view that you like. We haven't shown it in a while, but there's also the traffic animation and a variety of other options that you can do, like cherry picking the type of traffic that generates your topology in the first place, whether it's request-based or message-based or TCP-based, and so forth. But anyway, a couple of more things to talk about. As Nick mentioned, the one-click edge hide, we wanted to make that a really fast option because you can go from a very dense graph with a lot of edges to a quick, almost like dashboardy look like he was mentioning, especially when you're using the grid or breadth first layouts. And then, or the one-click healthy edge hide, which lets you immediately focus on traffic that might not be behaving as expected. A couple of other things that I'm not going to demo, but I'm going to mention around the stuff we did in usability is, as you noticed in Nick's demo, when you're zoomed out, we now have, we introduced actually in the previous sprint, the label, zoom aware labeling, so that your labels go away when you can't read them, but you still might want to know what's going on, so you can hover over those objects and get the context info. It was a little bit aggressive originally, where we would show context info over an actual label. We don't do that anymore to make it a little bit cleaner. And we also offer end-to-end path highlighting in the graph now, which means when you're hovering over an edge or a node, it's going to dim most of the graph. Actually, maybe I'll quickly show that just to show what I'm talking about. Hang on one second to go out of that mode and into this mode. So for example, you can see right now if I hover over this particular node, load tester, you're seeing we've changed things to be a little bit more clear. So we've increased the dimming and contrast so that you focus much more on the paths that are relevant. And you can see what end-to-end I meant, that everything from where the traffic enters over at ingress or potentially ends at MySQLDB is highlighted, and the rest is always dimmed. So you can really get a view of a particular pathway and which way your traffic may flow from any particular point. And as I said, if you zoom out, you'll see that the labels disappeared, but you can always get your context info by hovering, or you can get the whole context menu for navigation by right-clicking. All right, let me go back to slides. So this is a feature that's probably not for everyone, but something that's been asked for. We have added some support for unified metrics, which means that if you have multiple meshes, multiple clusters feeding to the same Prometheus in your environment, what we didn't have support for that in the past, such that you could actually get duplication. If you see the image here on the right, this is because you've got two meshes reporting for the same namespace. And then when you select that namespace from the dropdown, you would actually get the metrics from both. So you need a way to discriminate on that. And we've added this thing called query scope in the Kiali CR, which basically lets you add some label value pairs that will be applied to the queries for your particular Kiali instance. And then that combined with adding that label, those labels, when you're doing your value scraping or metric scraping, will allow you to actually make sure that a particular instance of Kiali is limited to a particular view of metrics in a shared Prometheus backend. Thanks to Zunzu in the community for introducing that feature. We worked with him to get it into place, and so we encourage anyone in the community that wants to contribute. We will work with you to help you bring your features into Kiali if it makes sense. A couple more notable fixes before we finish up. A lot of work going on. Some of the stuff we didn't show has to do with optimizations with, well, there's actually quite a lot of validation work that's gone on that we didn't show here. And I'm not even sure that's on this slide. It is, like cross namespace validations and so forth. And and a bunch of fixes around validations. So excellent work there by Hike. We handle multiple Istio D pods. That was another problem that was fixed, where if you had scaled up your Istio D, we had a couple of problems. That's been resolved. We now support namespaces that don't have any services, but only service entries. Kind of a corner case, but it's important if that's the way you're doing things. A lot of optimization work. Again, we're doing, as Leandro mentioned earlier, just around larger topologies across namespaces. We're doing a lot of work to make things more efficient. We fixed the problem with your Prometheus retention setting handling. There was a potential for having invalid durations in the dropdown, such that if you had a 7-day retention, you could actually get a 30-day option in the dropdown. That's been resolved. Custom time selection had an issue in, graph replay. That's been resolved. There was a problem when changing graph types for node graphs because there's some invalid combinations. That's now been prevented. And the last line actually is something there's been a lot of work put into, but not really something to show visually. But we are working on our health reporting. There's obviously a critical part of Kiali as knowing what's healthy, what's unhealthy in your mesh. There's a lot of work there, and we've been working to make it more efficient so that we can, again, do better with scale. All right, that is it. A little bit longer today. Thank you. That's 148, which will be released later today, Sprint 70. And we will be starting with Sprint 71 on Monday, and another one of these demos should be happening in 3 weeks. All right, thanks for attending. Thanks for watching, and we will see you. I will stop the recording now.